Why do you think that this job loss will be permanent?
It's great to be with you. Well, you cited the 42% figure. We got that in two parts. First, we surveyed firms in April and asked them, what fraction of your layoffs do you say are permanent? And that number was 23%. A recent household survey by the Washington Post actually got the same number. But then we did something else. We looked back and historically we said, of the layoffs that firms and workers thought were temporary when they happened, how many actually led to recalls? And a good chunk of them never led to recalls. So we put that historical evidence together with the survey evidence from April to come up with our 42% estimate.
Right. Now, I could see back during, 08, 09, a lot of the jobs that went away maybe wouldn't come back because you had a housing bubble and the bank sector, it was enormous, Wall Street. But in this case with the pandemic, why should it have the same effect? Why shouldn't it be the case that these job losses will prove temporary as people start to go back, return to their daily lives, so to speak?
Well, two big reasons. First, this idea that we're going to go into a deep freeze, and then when the thaw happens, we're all going to go back to things as it were. I think that idea has got serious problems and is partly wrong. We can see that in the kind of demand shifts that have already happened. Businesses are doing a lot less travel than they were before the pandemic. They're not going to go all the way back to where they were anytime in the near future. Airline travel is down more than 90% from a year earlier. The airline industry isn't going to come back to those levels in the near future. That's a lot of lost jobs. And then within sectors, like let's say healthcare, there's going to be big shifts. We've already seen a move to telemedicine, which is quite new in the US scene. Mm-hmm. That's not going to reverse. Some medical clinics, some doctors will be very adept at meeting the demand for telemedicine, customer preferences to avoid disease transmission risks, and others weren't. So we'll see a lot of shifts of that sort. There'll be a shift away from dine-in restaurants towards takeout and delivery. It's already happened, and some of it will stay in place.
Now,
there's one other thing to keep in mind.
Yeah,
one other thing to keep in mind is in the past, when we had temporary layoffs, most of them came back within 2 months, the ones that came back. But this pandemic recession looks like it's going to go on much longer than that. And that means many of those so-called temporary layoffs will never result in recalls.
The thing about your research that I also thought was very interesting is most people who come on and tell us it's going to effectively be a depression or a terrible event say, and that's why we need $8 trillion of stimulus and more from Congress and more from the Fed and internationally coordinated. And you guys have a very different sort of response that you think is appropriate. You say that instead, the best way to make sure the economy comes back more quickly is to remove barriers to a faster recovery. And that includes unemployment benefits that exceed worker earnings, subsidized employee retention, occupational licensing restrictions, regulatory barriers to business formation. Now, anyone who's been out there, trying to open a business knows exactly what you're talking about, but there's rarely appetite for this kind of response. Why would this time be different?
Well, first, let me say that there is a role for monetary and fiscal policy. But there's also an important role that's been overlooked for these other policy tools. And let me start with the unemployment insurance one that you mentioned. A new study by some of my colleagues finds that if you look at the bottom 1/5 of wage earners, they're getting paid twice as much on for unemployment benefits as they were paid when they were working. Now, you don't need a PhD in economics to figure out that's a very strong disincentive to going back to your old job. And it's a very strong disincentive to move to a new job if your old job's not coming back. That kind of policy discourages and delays this reallocation process we need. Don't get me wrong, there's an important role for unemployment insurance benefits to help those workers who have lost their job. But paying them more to not work than to work is not a very good idea in my view. Likewise, let's take the way the U.S. government has responded to the airline industry problem. Right now, the U.S. government is paying the airlines to keep their employees on payroll till October. Well, newsflash, the airline industry is not coming back to where it was in October. So as soon as October rolls around, there's two choices. Either taxpayers continue to pay airline employees not to work, or there's going to be large layoffs in the airline industry. That's just delaying the kinds of reallocation that we need. You mentioned several other things. Occupational licensing restrictions is a great example. During the crisis, Governor Cuomo said, wait a minute, don't we want out-of-state healthcare personnel to come to New York and practice and help our patients in New York? Of course we do. But it ran into occupational licensing restrictions, which are typically at the state level and prevent healthcare personnel and many, many other kinds of occupations and jobs, prevent people from working across state lines. We got rid of that. I hope, at least temporarily, I hope that kind of thing is permanent so that the economy can more quickly and adeptly respond to the kinds of shifts in the nature of labor demand that are taking place because of the pandemic.
Well, I encourage everyone to read the working paper. I link to it in my newsletter, and it is a fascinating dive on what this might all look like coming out the other side. Stephen Davis, thanks so much. We appreciate it.
Thank you.